Welcome back, everyone. This is a review of the Elekit TU-8600S Deluxe. I've got some notes here. It's very cold out, so I'm not in the studio. I'm just relaxing inside. And I'm going to try to make this not do any editing. So, because I've been getting backlogged in my reviews because it's become so cumbersome to make them. I want to try going back to what I started with, which is just uncut, straight shot. Okay, so this amplifier, which also has a volume control, so you could call it an integrated amplifier, was highly recommended by a number of people through the grapevine to me, and it piqued my interest. The other thing is, it's on paper has the potential to be really good. It's a 300B single-ended triode amplifier, and that's known to be a very good tube, the 300B, for low-powered amps. And one of the reasons I bought the Eclipse Cornwalls is I wanted to have the option of experimenting with low-powered amplifiers. So this amp is 8 watts a channel. It's fully Class A. It's a very simple signal path. And as a result of the basic signal path design, though, it really, to get good sound, you need very good transformers, output transformers. You need a really good power supply, power supplies, I should say. And you also need, let's see, what was the transformers, power supply. Oh yeah, the DC blocking capacitors between each stage of gain have to be really good, or you'll compromise the sound of the amp quite a bit. Obviously, like a DC coupled amp, there are no DC blocking capacitors. So that's not an issue, and it's one reason those theoretically could sound very good. But when you have this old school kind of design, you have to have all the things in the signal path working really well. Good quality. So that's why I decided to give it a try. Now let me show you the amp and tell you about my experience. I should mention that I did a separate video that gives you a good idea what it's like to build the kit, because it's only available in kit form. I'd say anyone could build it as long as you know how to solder, or learn how to solder first. And you can follow directions carefully, because if you get one little thing wrong, the whole amp won't work. And you're on your own to get it working. There is a guy, Victor, in Canada, you can call, and he'll help you as much as he can. But since he can't come to your house to help you, you're kind of, if you can't get it working, you're kind of in a pickle. All right, let me show you this amp. Okay, this is the amp here. There's a tube protector, which is, you can see it's perforated quite a bit. And I've already unscrewed it, so I didn't waste time during the video. It's really simple. You've got, there's 3 low-level tubes. This input tube, and then 2 tubes, one for each side, that actually have 2 channels that are in parallel driving the 300Bs, and these are the 300Bs. I should mention that the deluxe kit I got is about $2,000 without tubes, and you have to supply tubes, and I bought these most rudimentary set of tubes, which was about $300, and they offer more premium tubes, but I wanted to make sure it worked and that I liked it before possibly trying some better ones. So the front's really simple. There's a toggle switch to power on off. There's a light that comes on just showing the power's on. There's a 1/4-inch headphone jack, which I have not tried. and the volume control. Nice. It's very understated. It's very blank looking, but it's tasteful. I really like it. This is, I think, sort of a quintessential Japanese, where everything's adequate and nicely done, but there's no overkill with heavy face plates and doodads. On the back, it's also very simple. Let me get this here. So there's only one set of input jacks, single-ended RCAs. That's where you plug your DAC or your CD player, or if you had an external phono stage, you could plug the output of that into here. Your binding posts, which are pretty nice, they have sort of these molded plastic caps over them, which beefs up the diameter a little and makes it a little easier to tighten. Then there's this switch to switch the speaker impedance between 4 or 8 ohms up and 4 ohms down. And that you really kind of have to do by ear, because it's not like, because impedance varies with frequency, so I would just do it by ear. And there's other factors. And then the AC power cord inlet. And that's all there is to it. It weighs about 26 pounds. It's a steel, not an aluminum box. The only thing aluminum is this face panel. And this back wall section houses the transformers, the 2 output transformers and the power transformer for the power supply. Okay, now we're going to go back here. So what intrigued me was this kit is designed to take advantage of, even though it's only a $2,000 amplifier, it has the potential to be, albeit with limited power and a relatively high output impedance, so you can't drive really hard to drive speakers with this thing. But it has the potential to be really good because it has all the key things for a good power amp. Single-ended triode power amp, has the special output transformers, has pretty sophisticated, fully regulated power supplies. So you don't typically see that in a simple tube amp. Usually there's just a power transformer and some kind of rectifier and capacitors, or maybe capacitors combined with an inductor to get the ripple lower. But those aren't really regulated supplies. They're passive supplies. And theoretically, regulated supplies can be dramatically lower noise and clamp the voltage very precisely, and not be dependent on the wall voltage, what's coming out of the wall. Anyway, I don't want to get too technical. So let's see here. So I built the amp. I did have one problem when I built it, which is that the one problem I had was that there was one solder joint that it appeared to be connected, but actually there was solder on the pin of a chip and solder on the pad, but the two weren't touching. So anyway, it took me about a day to figure that out. I finally figured it out, and it works perfectly. The other thing I want to mention is this amp is auto biasing, so you just have to put the right tubes into the amp, and you don't need to make any adjustments. You don't need to adjust the bias like you do on a lot of tube amps. So that's nice, and if you're not comfortable doing that, it just saves you the hassle or concern of that. So when I first listened to the amp, I went from my Aries 2 directly into, which is the DAC I was using, the Denafrips Aries 2, into the input jacks of the amp. And right away, I noticed it was doing some really nice things, like the the soundstage was definitely wider and more dimensional, and there was more detail. I should mention that this thing is dead quiet, which is kind of amazing, with high sensitive speakers like the Cornwalls, and there's no hum and there's no tube brush or anything like that. So that's nice. So I was clearly hearing a lot of things I hadn't heard before, and it was really nice, except somehow the sound was very disjointed sounding. Like it wasn't, I can't really explain it well, but there was something weird about how it was sounding, and it was bothering me. So I thought, well, maybe the amp can't really drive the speakers. It was getting plenty loud. That's not a problem. These will blast the Cornwalls. This little amp will blast the Cornwalls. But maybe the load, the impedance was rising too high in some places or dropping too low and somehow causing a problem. So I just, for the heck of it, made up this little 3 parallel resistors that equals a little over 20 ohms. And I put that in parallel with the speaker load. You know, I attached it to the binding post at the back of the speaker across the speaker. So my thinking was, if the impedance of the speakers was high anywhere, like around 40 ohms or something, this would drop it down dramatically. And assuming it didn't really get, at like 4 ohms at the lowest, like the nominal impedance, it wouldn't have much impact. It's just basic resistor stuff. You can look up the formula and do the calculations yourself. But I thought it would knock down high impedances and not do much to the lower impedances, because you don't want it too low or you can harm the amp. So I tried that, and it did even out the sound, but it also, you could hear the amp was bogging down a little. It was getting darker sounding, less open, less dynamic, less life to it. So that wasn't too good. And I was getting a little bummed. I was thinking, well, it sounds like it's a really good amp, but it just doesn't work with the Cornwall 4s. So I kept listening to it. I should mention, I've listened to this amp well over 100 hours, maybe over 200 hours. I built it over a year ago. So then I got the idea, well, what if I, even though I don't need a preamp in the circuit, because I've got a volume control and I've got plenty of gain, what if I try, maybe the Aries 2 can't really drive the amp properly. Maybe I need the buffer stage of a real preamp. So I put my old Audio Research SP9 Mark II in there between the DAC and the amp, and that really helped. But I lost some of the magic of I lost some of the magic of the amp. So I kept listening. Then it occurred to me, well, maybe another thing I had was I had the speakers bi-wired, and the 2 speaker wires I was using were quite different from each other. I thought, well, actually, I know the one that was on the low frequencies tend to be a little hard sounding, and that's sort of some of the thing I was hearing. I thought maybe it's related. Anyway, so I shorted the speaker wires, and be careful with what I'm saying here. I basically made the speaker wires parallel speaker wires as opposed to bi-wiring. And I don't want to get into the difference here, but there's a difference. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't do it, because you could really hurt, you could wreck something in your system. And that seemed to help. So then I went back, and this is maybe after 50 hours of listening, all this crazy stuff. So then I went back and I took off said, well, maybe now I can go back and have the Aries 2 drive this directly instead of using the Audio Research preamp in the circuit. And I did that, and it sounded pretty good. I wasn't noticing that that funny, what do I call it here? Disjointed kind of sound. It didn't. It seemed pretty cohesive. I thought it's interesting. So I don't know why that is. Maybe the amp had to break in. Remember, this amp was never burned in. It wasn't even assembled, never mind burned in. I mean, so that it's possible the transformers or the capacitors or who knows what needed time to settle down or break in. That could be what I was hearing. So one of the things that the kit allows you to do is, and what they encourage, is to use better DC blocking capacitors. So this is the DC blocking capacitor that comes with the kit. And the way they design it, the circuit board has space for these little capacitors, but they leave you room to put much physically larger capacitors, and they encourage you to try that because they acknowledge how critical the blocking caps are. So this is a little 0.1 microfarad. I don't have my glasses on, I can't read it, but it's a, small capacitor, not great. So I put in these, which are, I think they're Sprague orange drop capacitors. They're pretty well known in the, I'll put them right next to each other. They're pretty well known in audio. They're not expensive, but they're reasonably good. And these were a lot, this is what I built it with, actually. I never used these. But one thing, so what I wanted to do, though, was use some really good capacitors. And I had these. These are old. I bought these in the 1990s, I think. So these are made by a company that's not in business anymore called Component Research. And these are what's called Teflon Foil Capacitors. These are military grade Teflon Foil Capacitors. I'm just looking here for the... So here's the one that comes with the kit. And here's the Teflon Foil Capacitor. They're huge by comparison. And this actually is a bigger value too. It's 0.82 microfarads instead of 0.1 microfarads. So I was taking a little risk that it might have oscillated or something, because there is some global feedback in the amp. But I put these in, and the difference was profound. It really, obviously the bass got a lot better, but it took made it much more natural sounding. And I don't know, there are very few foil capacitors that you can buy. There's one now that's not too expensive. I think they're like probably $30 a piece that is available now. I'll put a link below, but they don't look like this. They sort of do look like this, but they're not in a metal case like this. So these really technically didn't fit in the thing. I wrapped them with electrical tape to isolate them well, and then I very carefully put them in and made sure they wouldn't short anything out. So those made a huge difference, and it was really interesting to see that difference. This is the stock potentiometer. Oh, let's see, yeah. So then the other thing was I built it with this stock potentiometer, which they give you. And I was, so I did the capacitor thing, and built it with this, and it's kind of a hassle to switch over to the better TDK potentiometer that comes in the Deluxe kit. And I was kind of dreading it because I was thinking, yeah, it's a long switch over. I'm not sure I'm going to hear much difference. But one day I had some time and I thought I'd do it. And I was shocked by how much better the TDK potentiometer sounded than this potentiometer. And I was so shocked. I just grabbed a piece of cardboard that was next to me and a Sharpie, and I wrote down my notes because I didn't want to forget what I had heard. And here's my notes. So richer, quieter, more delicate, more engaging, hearing new things. And I mean a lot of new things. So it just shows how everything in the whole signal goes through can really affect the sound. I learned a lot doing that. Okay, so so when you do it right, this is a really good amp. I don't know, it's probably, I haven't heard every amp obviously, but it's really good. But you need a very high sensitivity speaker, and you need to build it yourself. And it has to be a load that this amp can drive properly. If I didn't make it clear, that thing I did with the resistors on the back of the speaker with these, I took those, I took them out as soon as I just confirmed that it was kind of bogging the sound down. I took them out. So, okay. So what I thought people might be curious is how it compares to the F7. And what I realized when I compared the two is, unfortunately, I think the sound of my Audio Research SP9, which is a 1980s vintage preamp, pretty good one, but is influencing the sound so much that I can't really say I can't do the first watt F7 justice, because I suspect that preamp is really not letting the F7 sound as good as it can. And I do think it sounds very good, but with that caveat, the F7 was sounded muffled by comparison. And the F7 did have a slightly deeper bass, but I'll tell you that this tube amp has remarkably tight bass when you use good speaker wire and really good DC blocking capacitors. It's really remarkable. It's pretty damn close to the F7. The F7 has less depth in the image. It's a flatter image. The F7 sounds, and I don't want to say this in a way, but it sounds like it might be lower distortion somehow. It's a little easier to listen to. This Elekit is much more dynamic, has much more snap. The F7, I would say, is smoother. It's more muted sounding. It's smoother sounding. But again, all that may be the limitation of the Audio Research preamp. And I would say, if anything, if you want to use this, the F7 sounds like a little over damped. And this one, the Elekit, if anything, sounds a little under damped. And I'm just talking relatively. I'm not saying either one actually is, but relatively speaking. So I think of this Elekit is, if you visualize a butterfly kind of flying around, it's kind of got it's just very nimble and responsive to everything. And the F7 is more like a bumblebee. It doesn't get flustered by anything. It's kind of just moves more mechanically, but it doesn't spaz. But I really like this Elekit amp. That's a kooky review. Okay, anyway, it's very good if you got the right speakers and you'd enjoy building it. I really enjoyed building it. I recommend it. Hope that helps. And leave any comments below. It's hard to keep track of everything. If I forgot something, I'll try to answer in the questions. Have a great day.